Welcome to number 36, meetup number 36 in the Data on Kubernetes community. My name is Bart Farrell, and this is meetup number 4 out of 5 that we're doing this week. It's been an intense week. Next week, we also have 4 meetups planned, so we're going pretty hardcore for the next few months. Good news in our community, things are moving forward. We next week will have a lot of our meetups uploaded to a CNCF page because we are now moving inside of the CNCF. Very excited about all the new developments there, and there'll be more news about that stuff too. However, the focus of today is not that. Tiffany is an extremely interesting person who I met a few months ago and very kindly got me in touch with Ravi, who is also working at Harness, and got me on their podcast called Ship Talk, where I had a wonderful time explaining my background, how I got into doing what I'm doing. But all that happened because of Tiffany. And so when I first met Tiffany, it's like, all right, I see you have this DevOps profile, but then I started looking around a few other places. I kind of like to spy around on people, or I guess you could say lurk, to see like what other things they've done. And 2 things stuck out really quickly, and I'm pretty sure we're going to get to both of them today. One was Tiffany's experience as a photographer. The other one was Tiffany's experience in the Apollo project. So I'd like you to talk about that briefly before we get started. But anyway, Tiffany, for the people who don't know you out there, I can also say as well, Tiffany has a lot of podcasts and interviews. You can hear her talking about lots of different kinds of things. And she was also thinking about launching her own podcast, and that's exciting too. So there'll be more news about that. But Tiffany, how are you? What are we going to talk about today?
Yeah, thanks so much for that introduction, Bart. Hi, everyone. I'm super excited to be here today. I'm actually going to be talking about 2 things I really enjoy talking about. One is DevOps, and the second one is photography. So when Bart and I were talking, when we had first met, we were kind of shooting around ideas about what we could talk about at this dev meetup. And Bart had noticed that, I did a little bit of photography on the side. And that it may be kind of cool to align whatever I end up talking about with photography. And it made me kind of think about, well, photography is such a big concept. There's so many parts to it, right? There's cameras, there's all the equipment that you need, there's different kinds of photography. So I kind of likened it to DevOps, because in the DevOps world, there's so many things going on. You hear about cloud native, container native, and then there's this data side. And then there's even the aspect of, well, practices and principles, and like, what does it even mean? And so you may have like all of these questions. And I just thought it may be really interesting to liken the 2 and kind of do this fun session on both, and to kind of share a little bit more about myself. I do work at a startup called Harness, and we are a CI/CD platform. We help simplify and scale software delivery. So this is very much in our wheelhouse. But before that, I was also in the open source space. I was a consultant at Red Hat, and then I eventually ended up at Red Hat after some student research that I was doing on just building content aware systems. So the Apollo project was one of those, and I had very academic background. I'm even finishing my graduate program at Georgia Tech. So I will be a master's of computer science later this year.
Woo! That's great. Good.
Yeah.
And
super
exciting. So what are you focusing on in that master's? Just curious.
Oh, it's computer science and then machine learning.
Okay, so very light reading.
Just casually.
And you've been doing this studying online, I guess, the whole time during the pandemic, or how have you been doing that?
Yeah, it's online. I've been taking one class for over 3 years now. Working full-time while doing part-time classes.
Wow, fun. That's a lot of work, and being involved in podcasts and lots of other things. And also as well too, is that we've had, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Alex Jones is also in the DevOps Institute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had Alex Jones with us. Guy. Yeah, he's amazing. He's great. He's a wonderful resource. I love all the stuff that he puts out on Twitter. And very willing to help out. Does coffee chats as well too. If anybody ever wants to grab a slot, you should do the same thing, Tiffany. And coffee. Yeah, the thing is like coffee, conversation. What more can you ask for? So anyway, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do in the DevOps Institute, and then also a little bit more about your role in Harness?
Yeah, sure. So I create content is the best way to share it. I share best practices, guides, just getting people to this part where they can invest into their CI/CD process. They can invest into their software delivery processes. Also spend a lot of time doing research and just field studies, figuring out where people are struggling. And in those particular areas, I talk to more experts in the field and try to get to this part where we can help simplify and scale software delivery, because I think nowadays it's really challenging if you are not like the Amazons of the world or Facebooks of the world to do software delivery, because it just seems like this process is so disjoint. There's so many scripts. It takes like a whole village to deploy, when in reality, we kind of want to make this accessible, because at the end of the day, the people who are using your software, they don't care if you're using a CI/CD platform. They don't care what you're using. They just care about that end value that you're delivering. And so we're trying to make that process easier. And so a lot of my work centers around that at Harness. And then, there's also a lot of great communities out there to help support that. So, Data on Kubernetes is one of those communities. The DevOps Institute is one of those communities, and so is the Continuous Delivery Foundation. So I think we're just starting to see a lot more people invest into this idea that software delivery needs to be accessible to even startups or smaller organizations that don't have like 300, 400 developers on the teams.
Mm-hmm. So we can say a lot of this comes down to empowerment. Or we can say creating more of a level playing field so that folks out there don't feel like so helpless when comparing, as you said, rightfully so, with the Amazons and the Facebooks out there. It's so daunting to think, how can I possibly compete? That's really, really good. All right, cool. So do you want to share your screen so we can start taking a look at photography?
Yes, let's share screen. How's this look?
Looking good.
Sweet. Cool. Thanks, everyone. So yeah, let's get to this presentation. I mentioned that I was excited about this because this is a topic that I really enjoy. And, there's a lot to cover in DevOps. And, this is only going to be, again, like a snapshot of it. But I did want to provide some of the things that I think are most important about DevOps and spend that time talking about it. And so maybe you are looking for your next career in DevOps, or maybe you just want to know a little bit more about DevOps. There's also this kind of weird third case where you already know about DevOps. You're probably a DevOps engineer or DevOps manager, but this sounded kind of cool and you want to learn more about photography. You'll also get that in the session. So I'm actually really excited to be here with you all today. But with that, I do want to share like some of the things that we'll be covering in the session. And I always want to step back and talk about sort of the history and the reason why things came about the way that they did. And I want to look at it through the perspective of photography, but also DevOps. And so we're going to cover that along with some definitions. And then we'll actually get to the practices and tooling and some of the technologies, that you would need to know in order to really start your DevOps journey or start your DevOps career. So, I think it's always really interesting to kind of think about how things were then versus now. And if we look at it from the perspective of photography, there are a lot of things that have changed. When we first started out, there was this longer process of having to when we wanted to take pictures and share it with people, we'd have to either draw them by hand, right? So not really a picture. But then there was also other process of bringing in our pictures into a dark room and processing them over time. And then eventually, maybe weeks, months later, you'd get your end result, you get your picture. Versus now where we can kind of do all of these things with our phones by the touch of the hand, and immediately too. You could easily process your photos, take them, and then share them out into the world. It's not this super long process, and it's not like you have to really even process it. Even everything's already done through technology, and so you can tell the difference between these two things. It's very different. Everyone's mindsets are different around it. If you were to take someone who only knew about about darkroom processes and photography through darkroom, then they may not even even be able to begin to understand what it's like taking pictures through a phone or taking selfies and posting it to Instagram or Snapchat or any of our other social media channels. And I kind of liken that to software delivery then versus now. In the past, we would, traditionally have these waterfall methodologies. I mean, the processes are still the same, right? We're still going to gather requirements, we're still going to design, we're still going to build our code and verify it, and then, eventually deliver it to people. Like those steps are still the same. Just like in photography, we're still going to take the picture, we're still going to process it, and then we're still going to share it out into the world. The only difference now is that we have DevOps. We have this DevOps lifecycle that encourages people to continuously deliver value. And so, even though the pieces are similar, the way that we work with them is different, and the mentality behind it is very different. And so I really like sharing this because it shows like, things haven't changed that much, but we are now in this process of making things better and faster and even just more accessible to everybody. And so you may be wondering like, okay, there's all of these pieces, but now we have to change people's mindset around how we deliver software. It's not, it doesn't work to just build code all at once, the whole entire thing, and then ship it out, because we're going to see issues with it. We're going to have things that we're going to want to change. Requirements may have completely changed by the time we delivered all of the code that we implemented. And so, that led to things like the agile methodology, and then now this progression into DevOps. And so getting to a DevOps culture is actually pretty hard, because you have to change these mindsets. And when you talk about changing a mindset, when you talk about implementing a DevOps culture, you actually have to work your way into each of these kinds of layers of a DevOps culture. So the mindset, the values, the principles. And then that's when you can actually get to the practices and the tools. It doesn't make sense to just give a photographer, to give someone a phone when they have no idea about how to use it, why they should be using it, what are they even going to do with it. And so this is why in this session, I kind of want to work through some of these layers all the way down to the level of practices and tooling. And I do want to liken it to photography, right? Because this is a journey. You're going to learn this process, and you have to develop from the mistakes, right? You have to focus on what's important. You have to capture collaboration, and then you have to polish what you know. You have to polish and practice your tooling. You have to practice your new set of skills. And so getting to a DevOps culture means that you're committing to many of these things. And I actually can't see chat, but
no, you're all good. You're all good. But I have a question.
Yeah.
Because mentioned, and maybe you'll get to this later. When you're talking about this, is something that's quite recurrent, and we spoke about yesterday, and I try to mention it as often as possible. It's one thing to talk about the technology, but talking about the culture, all right, and talking about the culture and really preparing and change management and organizational development and all those things. We live very much in an age of plug and play. And so I think that in the same way as like, oh, well, if I can download, Kubernetes, or I can install this program, that means that I'm ready to go. But I think this idea of being ready to go involves much more than that. It's not to say that there's a perfect, time frame that you could say like, all right, we're going to install an agile methodologies or Scrum or DevOps, et cetera. But normally when companies want to be doing this, is there any minimums you think they should be thinking about in terms of time, resources, conversations, roles that will be necessary to make these transitions successful?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And it really does stem from understanding the big picture at the end of the day, right? Because you can throw in, it's like you said, you can throw in any technology you want. I mean, anyone in leadership could say like, hey, we're going to go into a service mesh architecture any day. And what happens
it sounds really good. It sounds really good.
Yeah, they'll sell you on it. They'll sell you on it, and everyone will agree because they think like, yeah, this is gonna be awesome. This is gonna be fun. And then what happens is you just have the layers of tooling and practices, and they just float into the abyss. That's what happens. There's nothing to ground them. When you 3 months later, when you ask someone, hey, why are we doing this? Or what is this providing us in terms of benefits? Or 5 years later, you'll ask, What did you do over the past 5 years? What value did you deliver to the customer? People
That's
won't know
it.
how to answer that question.
And that's
They'll
and
say,
that's my other question as well too, is that when, for you, what's a serious conversation about value? Or how can, does value come first? Does culture come first? Do they both play off of each other? What do you think?
yeah, I think at the end of the day, too, if you work for an organization, you work for a company, people are going to ask you, like, what were the outcomes? What were the things that you achieved? So you're going to get that question from someone, and that question will trickle down its way through management or whatever your company hierarchy is. And then if you don't actually have certain conversations about, well, how is this a benefit or what value is it bringing, then you're not going to be able to answer that question.
Yep. Agreed. Agreed. I think what the point is, I think the major point is here is that these things just aren't as simple as the few clicks that it might take for something to happen. And also, when you're talking about, I mean, whether it's a small organization that's using cowboy management or a traditional consulting firm that's got, thousands of employees, really thinking about the stakeholders and having a key role of empathy, I always think is really, really important. Anyway, keep going.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
we'll start to see a lot more of that too in this presentation.
Yes. Good.
Yeah. So I did want to actually share a definition that I think works well for DevOps. And I'm sure everyone has their own definitions and understanding that works for them. But I think this one is the one that will drive a lot of the conversations that we'll have in this session. And to me, DevOps is the collaboration and collection of people, process, and technology. And we use it to continuously deliver software value because we do care about that end goal of the fact that software doesn't live or we don't create software for it to exist in a silo. We create it to help other people. We create it to deliver value to our customers. And so this is what DevOps means to me.
Oh,
Yeah.
1 second. Can you go back to that previous one?
Yeah.
We got a couple because we got a couple of questions. So
Awesome.
one is from Corey. Thank you, Corey. Do you think companies use DevOps engineers as golden trash bins with the idea of throw anything at them and expect them to make gold out of it? That's a good question.
That is a good question. I think that there's a lot of expectations around DevOps practitioners, right? Because DevOps includes so much that if you just throw anything at them, they'll make value, they'll churn out value, right? When in reality, no one does it alone. No one delivers value all on their own. You could have that rare case where you just have one DevOps engineer and they're a one-man team and they get everything done, but that just doesn't scale. If you need to deliver, say, like, hundreds of microservices or maybe different types of applications, it just doesn't scale. But yeah, I definitely do think that there is that pressure, and I think we need to be realistic about it because at the end of the day, our delivery teams are cross-functional. They involve our product folks. They involve our security folks. They involve developers, IT ops. And so as much as DevOps engineers are, praised to be this golden trash bin. I love that. I've never heard that.
Me either. Me either.
It's more of they're more of a bridge and a catalyst to collaborate to facilitating these aspects in my mind. That's how it should be ideally.
Okay, good. And then we got one more question. Is it the job of DevOps to do change management? I think that's a really good question as well. In terms of an organizational role, obviously DevOps will be involved in some elements of change management, but perhaps should there be other roles that might be incorporated first?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. There's actually I think there's like a book on DevOps topologies that explains like the different types of DevOps engineers and their roles and functions across different organizations because it is different. From my time consulting, there are some DevOps engineers who solely focused on owning the CI/CD pipeline. There are some that did a lot of platform engineering. There are some other ones that implemented continuous monitoring, observability into their applications. So I think it depends on your organization, what you end up doing. So it's worth asking that question if you are considering like a move into DevOps, like what are the things that I own, because sometimes that line is blurred, and depending on the roles that are already in that organization, maybe there's another group that owns it versus DevOps.
All right, good. Keep going.
Great questions. I do now want to go through some of the key principles in DevOps, because if you are trying to implement DevOps, there's a couple of principles that will allow you to kind of realize why it is that we have certain practices that we do in DevOps. And it'll also probably help you to make a decision whether or not you want to implement a practice or a tool. I think principles are things that apply to larger teams versus practices and tools. They'll apply to individuals or smaller teams. So a lot of the practices that teams choose are team specific. You'll have a team that wants to use Prometheus and Grafana. They'll use a particular stack. And then you'll have another team that uses a different stack. And that's their choice, right? But at the end of the day, all of these kind of development teams, ops teams, they fall under some of our umbrella principles that an organization has. So if you really want to drive this understanding of DevOps, you really do want to focus in on the principles. And the first one, I think that's really important, that's sort of really defined DevOps in a bunch of ways, is this principle about creating with the end in mind. So if you're creating with the end in mind, you're really thinking about that deliverable, that value, and that's really your vision, right? And that vision will inform everybody else on your team, even the person who is working on the tiniest service, right? The tiniest application in a sea of services. They'll still be able to understand how they're contributing to that big picture. And, I think in that process too, when you're creating with the end in mind, you're also you're also telling yourself that you're committing to getting there. So whether it has to involve certain enablement or certain tools or certain resources, you're committed to supporting everybody who's involved in this process to get there. And I think that commitment is really important, because when you don't have that commitment from your teams, then you don't have the support. And so you'll see oftentimes when you're working with different organizations or working on different applications or projects, that people just don't know what's going on or what's happening, because there's no commitment to supporting that. And we mentioned service mesh earlier. If you're not committed to fully to realizing the deliverable, you'll get lost in the sea of all of these configurations and nuances with service mesh.
I think this idea of having a vision, like you said, something to be tested, whether it's a hypothesis or things like that. I think also with photography is that some people might just start pointing and clicking, but I think, and I'm curious as to your opinion as someone who's really worked with photography, before you take a picture, that you have in your mind what picture you're expecting to get. That there can always be something a little bit random, and you'll probably get into this more later, but the ingredients that are necessary, distancing, lighting, exposure times, all that kind of stuff is really, as much as you can, knowing, like you said, start with in mind, imagine what is the outcome of this? What is it that I'm expecting to get? I think, like I said, in the case of photography, well, not particularly because of phones, is that no, I just point and shoot randomly. But I imagine that professional photographers probably have a pretty clear idea in mind of what the photo that they're trying to get, right?
Yeah, it's so true. Some of the most, famous or most memorable photographs in American history, they were planned. These photos were realized at the end. There was this really popular one. It's called the migrant mother. And it was a image that was taken for the purpose of just sympathizing with the Great Depression and people who were suffering. And the photographer who took the picture, she had to take a series of photos to get to the end result. And so I think it's really important that even if we have to take multiple attempts at something, that we do get what we want at the end. And so it's like what you said, Bart. It does take a lot of planning and initiative, and even for many professional or commercial shots, there's a whole team that's planning these what the end picture will look like, right? And they are inspired by the people who are on their teams to evolve that vision and really produce like an amazing end result. And so that's something that's always worth considering.
Good stuff. I know what you mean about the migrant mother. I think also some very famous pictures from the American Civil War were also planned. Like after battles, they would take someone and move them to a specific place because they really wanted to get that particular shot. Anyway, though, keep going.
Yeah, that's also really interesting. I'll have to add to that. that even in post production, post processing, people will blur certain parts of an image, or maybe they'll even Photoshop certain areas too, just so that people who are looking at the end result, they'll focus on on the message, on what they really need to focus on. Awesome.
Good.
So if this will advance, I will be very happy.
Don't worry, it's okay.
Great. So the second one is about cross-functional teams. And so this is about building teams that have the autonomy to make their own decisions and to own end-to-end their entire life cycle. So in terms of, so you can take, for example, a developer. They're fully responsible for the development of their code. And the reality of it is our DevOps practices and our DevOps engineers, they're here to support that, whether it's increasing visibility into a CI pipeline, into, bugs, into defects, into things that aren't working. They're here to support that. And I think the main goal of management is to encourage that and facilitate that. And so when you're building cross-functional teams, you really do want to encourage this willingness to collaborate across different teams, because delivery is not just the responsibility of ops or the responsibility of developers. It's everyone's responsibility, just like security is everyone's responsibility. And so one of the core principles of DevOps is to build these cross-functional delivery teams.
Good. We actually got a question about that. So how to deal with other teams? As DevOps, we're supposed to be in the bridge between ops and dev. In theory, that's nice, but in practice, there can be a lot of contention. Where the DevOps fit in a where do DevOps fit in a flat or hierarchical organization? What authority do they have and who gives it to them? And do you think they belong as a side service, or are they directly attached to a project under a product manager, for example?
Great. That's a couple of questions built into
that.
Yeah.
You got fans. This is what this means. This is good.
So
if you want me to, we can unpack it. All right.
Yeah, let's unpack it.
So where do DevOps fit in a flat or hierarchical organization?
Yeah, in a flatter organization, the lines are blurred, right? Because you end up wearing many hats. But I think it goes back to saying like you're that conduit for continuous delivery of value, right? So sometimes that means if you have developers on your teams, or IT ops on the teams, you're kind of looking at both sides and trying to help with that flow of value. So if delivery teams have problems delivering artifacts or delivering packaged code that's ready to be shipped out, then that's where DevOps can kind of come in and say, well, let's build a CI/CD pipeline, or let's build some of these practices and tools so that you can really depend on some of those things to get better quality out the door. And then likewise, if we're having issues with security, right, maybe even introducing things like vulnerability scanning into our processes. So you're really looking at things from a very high level about how every single little piece kind of flows through that DevOps lifecycle that I showed.
Okay, good. And then the authority that they have and who gives it to them?
I think that depends on your organization.
Right? Yeah, I think that does depend a lot on the organization.
Yeah, I think sometimes I think like when you have a very large DevOps group, you'll get it'll be sometimes a little bit easier to define because you have other people in the group, and sometimes they can be attached to a certain application, right? They're there to support that team. Maybe you even have like mini teams. Again, it goes back to topologies. You can have mini teams that deliver one service and you have one DevOps person there versus some other organizations where you have a DevOps group and they kind of spread themselves out across different applications and they kind of get to know. It really depends. And I think it also changes too, for depending on what your challenges are, what your priorities are. For a lot of people, they're kind of still just starting out with Agile and DevOps. And so that Agile part of it is where they struggle and they're still kind of, maybe they don't even have a lot of unit tests, or they don't have a good just foundation for delivering. Then you may be more heavily involved with that particular team, and so you may be assigned to a team, and then in the future when you're trying to scale things out, you're kind of involved with multiple teams, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Good. And then do you think they belong as a side service or directly attached to a project under a project on a product manager, for example? I think that also might depend on the organization. I think that could have something to do with it. That's okay. Awesome. Good. I think we can keep going. But anyway, thank you everybody for the questions. Keep them coming.
Nice. Awesome. And this one's the last key principle that I want to share. And this is the commitment to the journey. As I mentioned, it's kind of tough because for a lot of people, they think like DevOps is an end goal. It's something that you can achieve. But in reality, again, it's this continual a set of practices, this continual culture that lives in our organizations for delivering better software faster in a more repeatable fashion. And in this way that doesn't burn everybody else out on your teams, right? And so even when it's not perfect at the beginning, even when things are really difficult, there's this idea that we're going to continuously improve to get to this place where things are ideal and value is flowing out continuously. And this commitment to the journey involves things like learning from failures, right? Being open to talking about failures and saying like, hey, this was a mistake and we're going to learn from it, and this is how we're going to change things, because we can only do things the best way that we know how to at that moment. And so when we learn extra things, that's when we can make things better. And then there's also the sense of experimentation, right? Being not afraid to try new technologies to make things better. And I think as long as you kind of have this spirit, then you'll do fine in DevOps. And I like this quote that I have down here from Brene Brown that says, "I'm not here to be right, I'm here to get it right." And I think that's a really great mindset for management or team leads or even individual contributors to come in with, is just this idea that we're not here to say like things have to be this way. We're not here to micromanage anyone either, or say like, hey, you're not doing enough. No, like this is everyone's responsible for delivering a code. Everyone's responsible for delivering value. We're here to get it right together. Awesome. So I kind of wanted to share some of the key principles in photography, because getting to the end result can kind of feel a little bit weird if you don't know some of the key principles about photography. And so when we take a picture, we actually deal with a lot of parameters, but these are the three main ones that control what our end picture looks like. And it's aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. Aperture refers to how much light you let into your camera sensor. So all of our cameras are built with sensors. Some of them may not be, but we'll just say that our cameras are built with sensors, and these sensors are actually made out of MOSFETs that are sensitive to light. And so when our camera um, shutter closes, it actually lets in a certain amount of light for a certain amount of time. Um, and it has a certain sensitivity to that light that produces an image. And so in aperture, we're controlling how uh, how how wide that opening is when we click that shutter. And what happens is it really does our cameras are very much like how our eyes work. The more light that you let in to your eyes, the the more you'll be able to focus on things that are close to you. And that impacts something called depth of field. And so aperture is this F number, and the smaller the F number, the wider the opening is. And so if you have a very small opening, you get a picture of the sunflower, but also everything in the background is focused versus um, in the smaller F number on the picture on the left, you don't see as much as of the background and it's kind of blurred. So you can kind of toy around with the setting. Also, this is something that you sometimes have to deal with depending on how bright your location is. If your location is really, really bright, say for example, you are staring at the sun, don't do that. But if you're staring at the sun, you probably don't want to let in that much light into your eyes because you'll be blinded. So it's just something that you control in photography. Second thing that we can control in photography is shutter speed. So shutter speed is how fast you have that shutter open and close to let light into your camera and take that picture. And shutter speed actually is related to movement in the image. So if your shutter speed is really slow, then you'll kind of get a lot of movement in the image. So on the right side, we have a second shutter speed, and you can kind of see things are a little bit blurry because there was just movement in the grass and in the water, versus in a shorter shutter speed, you have this kind of crisp image, right? And so if your target or whoever it is that you're taking a picture of, your subject is moving a lot, say for example, you're taking a picture of a cheetah that's running like 60 miles per hour, right? You'll want to go at a higher shutter speed so that you can catch that crisp action, right? And so shutter speed is a measure of seconds, and you can kind of see that there. And then this third parameter that we're tweaking and trying to learn from, and these three parameters, they kind of affect each other, right? This third parameter is around ISO, which is a measure of sensitivity to light. What happens is if we tune our sensitivity up really high to something like 3,200 or 64,000, we'll actually get a lot more noise in our image, versus in a lower ISO level where you're not as sensitive to the light, your image will come out darker, but you'll get this crisper image. And in some cases, if you tune your ISO really, really low, your picture will just come out black because you're just so insensitive to light that you don't recognize it. And so you may lose features. And so with all of these parameters, you can kind of tune them to the worst image possible or the best image possible, right? But it's kind of this game where you're playing with all of these settings so that you can get a picture that's clear, or maybe not clear if you don't want it to be. And that's kind of how we go about these three areas. And I kind of think of these three areas as similar to DevOps, because your goal is really to pay attention to your people, your process, and your technology, and not be blindsided by any one component when you're trying to get to the end result. So that's probably just something that you want to consider, is like, how much of a pulse do I have on the people on my team, on my processes? Do I care more about my processes than my people? Am I not paying attention to my processes at all? Are my processes even helping anyone? Are they working with the technology? Do they need to change? Right? If we're throwing in new technology, are we ensuring that people are enabled? these are some of the questions that we ask, just like we would ask in photography. Like, is my shutter speed too slow? Does my aperture need to change? Kind of get to a lot of these things, and that's kind of how I think about the two.
I mean,
Do we have any questions?
related to that is what you were saying earlier too about about failure. I mean, as a lot of people out there, like I think I got a camera, like a reasonable camera, in I think it was 2010, and yeah, and of course, I think it's also with digital cameras. You can take as many pictures as you want, and then you go and delete them. But I would say the vast majority of the pictures that I've taken in my life have not been amazing. That like to really get it right is a multi-step process of trial and error. And like you said, once you become aware of those other ingredients about how to adjust the ISO, and if you go out in the middle of the day, or if you're in a city with a lot of artificial light, or all those different factors that can come into it, I think in the same way with DevOps software development in general, to be forgiving towards yourself that you're going to make mistakes and it's not the end of the world, because you mentioned that as being an important part of it. And I wanted to know, what are some mistakes that you've made, and what strategies would you suggest about how to get those things out in the open more comfortably, rather than, oh, I hope nobody notices and we'll just try to pretend like nothing happened?
Sorry, could you repeat that question? I
Yeah,
was distracted by chat.
you mentioned earlier about how it's important to create a culture where people can acknowledge their mistakes and get them out in the open. What strategies do you use on a personal level to do that, so that you, like I said, so you don't have to feel like you're hiding something that might be inconvenient, but rather just to kind of own it, in the same way that you take a picture that's not so good, you're like, yeah, that picture wasn't so good, I'll try better the next time. What's your
Yeah.
strategy?
Yeah, I definitely lean into retrospectives. So at the end of sprints or end of bodies of work, or after we do a delivery, I lean into a retrospective. And that's kind of my space to say or admit things that went well and didn't go well for me. And it's not about pointing fingers at anyone else. It's about my perceptions and what I think I could do better, or what the team could do better. And I always try to target it towards a team setting, because the last thing you want to do is call someone else out for their mistakes, or you may not even feel comfortable calling out yourself for your own mistakes. But I think it's something that's worth putting up there and sharing with the team. And even if you don't own up to that mistake, you still acknowledge that it is something that you can improve on, right? And whether you do that internally or externally, I think it's a good way to kind of give yourself that time to acknowledge it. That's my advice there.
Good. All right. Perfect. Another question. In terms of this mentality, I mean, since our community, we do talk a lot about Kubernetes and things like that. Are there any things in terms of mentality and culture that maybe we haven't mentioned that you think are additionally important in the Kubernetes world? Or do you think that a lot of these things carry over quite smoothly?
Yeah, I honestly think that I see the biggest issues around technology and people when it comes to Kubernetes. Because I mentioned this a few times, that I don't think Kubernetes is really a tool for developers. If it was, we wouldn't have so many questions around it, and there wouldn't be all of these other third-party vendors or flavors or distributions of Kubernetes trying to make this easier for developers. So I think that there's just a lot of questions around that, and there's kind of a skill gap around Kubernetes, and so I think if for organizations that are trying to bridge the gap between their people and their technology, or for anyone who's migrating to Kubernetes, right? Just try to particularly pay attention to how people are responding to new technologies in the Kubernetes ecosystem, because there are so many out there right now. And
Yes, that's
yes,
true.
it helps.
And every day more. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can say like, yes, it helps the DevOps lifecycle. It helps, our workflows. It helps with so many things, but just because it helps doesn't mean like everyone's going to be able to like magically know how this works and everything. You're going to snap your fingers and we're going to be able to solve all these problems. It does take time, and it does take enablement and new skills sometimes, because you're not born knowing everything about technology. Like you spend 10 years, working with this particular technology and then not know nothing about the next thing, so.
Good stuff. Good. Let's keep going.
Sweet. Yeah. I love these questions. Someone mentioned Brene Brown in the chat, and yeah, I love all of her content. And she actually writes this book on Dare to Lead. It's called Dare to Lead. And it actually brings up vulnerability and being able to own up to your mistakes in these kind of team and organizational settings. So Bart, your question on that reminded me of that.
I think it's really good. That's the thing, is everybody's going to make mistakes, from the intern to the CTO. And so it's not about the mistakes you make, is how you obviously understand there are different kinds of mistakes and ones that shouldn't be repeated or ones that should never happen. But I think that, it's part of being human, and it's going to be part of the process. It's going to happen. So have a strategy for it. And when I make mistakes, I generally try to own them as quickly as possible, and to give as deep of an analysis as I can, in order to show, ownership of the things that I've done.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how we grow together as a team. And you also inspire other people on your team to consider like what all this means, what this journey means for everyone too.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, I love that. Cool. So without further ado, I'll get to the last part of this presentation, which is the practices and the tooling. I know we have about 10 minutes left to go, and I think we'll be able to make it. All right. So the way I think about practices and tooling, I think about it as like the conduits for getting to where you need to go. You can't take a picture without a camera, and you can't take a picture without a battery to power that camera, right? So you kind of need to think about the equipment and the gear that you'll need to be able to get where you want to go. And so, there are certain things that you wouldn't want to leave the house without, in terms of photography, right? And I listed a couple because I've been subject to forgetting one or many of these things. And these are our equipment, these are our tools, and how we work with them is our practices. So this is my list for photography, but I also have a list for DevOps, and that's what I'm going to be sharing. So this first tool, practice, I think is really important. And I think this is where I want to start because it's so important. And this one is about version control. I think now more than ever, we're starting to see everybody using version control. Before it was kind of like a devs tool, but I think today we're seeing DevOps engineers, IT ops, security folks really embracing this idea of versioning their infrastructure, versioning their code, versioning pretty much anything that they can. And so if you're just starting out with version control, maybe you haven't had a lot of practice with it, I recommend you at least know the basic functions and actions of how to use Git and how to use source code management. And the basics are here. It's know how to add files, know how to commit them, know how to push them, know how to deal with merge conflicts, and know how to work with branches. So it's fairly straightforward, but this will get you really far in just the basics. And you'll be surprised, like just committing to these 5 actions, like understanding how they work, just those 5 things, you'll know pretty much everything you need to know about Git. Of course, like there are other things that, like hard resets and all the other stuff, but just getting these 5 down initially, it'll take you a long way.
All right, we got a couple of questions. Do the DevOps force the Git flow to the dev teams, or are they forced to comply with the devs?
Oh, interesting. So I think it depends on your organization. I hate saying that.
But it's true. Yeah, there are all different kinds of companies out there.
Yeah. I think in terms of your Git flow, man, that's the thing.
Or better yet, because there's a follow-up question to that from Corey. Thank you, Corey. Is that what do you think is a good flow in 2021?
Oh, I'll get to this.
Okay. So we want to save that for later then?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we had another question.
Yeah.
When we think DevOps, we think about the 8, that figure that you showed at the beginning. According to GCP's videos, they have a series Class SRE implements DevOps. SRE feels much different and doesn't fit in this 8. Where do you think SRE stands? Is it really important? In the same line, what about cloud architects? Anyway, let's just maybe touch on, because I have seen some articles talking about DevOps versus SRE. Interestingly enough, how we mentioned Alex Jones earlier, who's in the DevOps Institute, but is also an SRE. How do you see that? Is there a big difference? What are the differences?
Yeah, I think the biggest differences are just around like what they focus on. SREs are really trying to measure and ensure reliability across their applications versus DevOps engineers who maybe just think who are, really focused on flow. There is some overlap. Like I've seen a lot of SRE teams actually own the CD or CI process for their applications. But I think there is like a lot of there is like a class of SREs or like a group of SREs and like whatever organization that you want to take implementing DevOps. And a lot of times they actually own specific environments. So like if you want to do a production deployment into an environment, they'll actually say, well, you messed up a lot of times this month. You caused like 5 incidents in the production environment. We're going to close this down until you actually fix some of those defects and bugs. And so they actually have a lot of power to do that. And I've seen like certain SRE handbooks that say like you kind of want to budget errors and measure how reliable your application is, and that's what they're on the hook for. In terms of cloud architects, again, depends on your organization what they actually end up doing. I think architects they kind of oversee the architecture of your applications. So, if you are designing like a service mesh, kind of infrastructure or a layout, they'll kind of map things around and reason about it, and then they'll actually enable the team to help to implement that. So that's kind of where they live.
Good stuff. Cool. Let's keep going.
Sweet. So the reason why I actually ended up talking about source code management is because it's actually pretty much the trigger or the start of our software delivery process. So you develop the code, you commit it to this source code management tool. It's versioned, right? There's a version of the application here. If everything goes wrong or crappy, we can always revert back to the old one. We have copies of all of our code, right? That's basically the premise behind version control. The premise behind source code management is that you have a copy of all the changes of your code ever in existence, right? And so in continuous integration, we're really focusing on enabling a developer workflow to get from code commit, when you submit that code, to a packaged piece of code, built piece of code that we can then use for our production deployments. And so this process involves different tools that you can use, right? You can have your GitHub repository, your GitLab repository, Bitbucket repository, right? Commit some code into that, and then it'll launch this continuous integration process that actually builds our application. So compiles it, builds it, packages it up, right? Tests it, and then submits it to an artifact repository where that version can be released for continuous delivery. And so whatever you do in this kind of area, right, it may help with your continuous integration, but at the end of the day, this helps your developer workflows. And so the really important thing here that you want to focus on, if you're a DevOps engineer, if you're thinking about DevOps, right, just do I have enough tests in my continuous integration pipeline? Because if I don't, then what happens is I make some code commit, some trash code, right? I don't know, it compiles, but it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. It'll pass this test, it'll become an artifact, and it'll get carried on to further away from you as a developer. And you may not get it back until 2 months down the road, 3 months down the road, when you've made so many other changes, don't even remember what the feature was, and you didn't catch that you didn't catch that earlier. And what you want to do in DevOps is you want to shift all of these issues closer to the left in this life cycle, right? Closer to the left so that you can capture those mistakes before they actually happen. And so in this process as well, you have things like static code analysis. So in our cube, you have vulnerability scanning. You can scan your containers, you can scan your images. Just make sure things that, there's nothing wrong with your dependencies. There's no security vulnerabilities, things like that. And then with the artifacts, you can also version them, right? And, call it a beta, call it an alpha, call it a final release, whatever you want to do, right? But the goal is you build once, you have this artifact, and now you can do something with it.
Okay, one quick question. With container repositories like ECR on on AWS, does a dedicated artifact solution like JFrog really make sense?
It depends. Maybe you don't. It depends on what additional functionality your like JFrog Artifactory is going to provide you. Sometimes you'll just use one or the other. But again, at the same time, some people will on at least cloud, public cloud infrastructure, they'll kind of want their own third-party vendor in case they need to migrate out of the cloud for whatever reason. So like for us, for Harness specifically, we were on AWS and then we had to migrate to GCP. That's when it kind of made sense. It makes sense to have a Nexus repository or JFrog Artifactory if you are on different infrastructures or different clouds, right? You don't want to get locked into any particular solution.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my response there. Yeah, great questions. Cool. And then so we actually get to the continuous delivery aspect of it, right? When we pick up that artifact and we try to put it into a production environment. And this process actually takes quite a bit of stuff, right? Requires some infrastructure because our code needs something to run on now, right? So customers can use it. There's a certain strategy to how we release or deliver that application out to our customers. Maybe we slowly roll it out. Maybe we roll it out, but only release it out to a subset of users. And then we also need to verify that this application works the way that we're expecting it to. So we may have things like Prometheus, New Relic, App Dynamics, Splunk, kind of watching over, ensuring that there's no major incidents. If there are major incidents, right, we need a plan to roll back. And that's what continuous delivery is about. It's not just about getting something running on a server. We actually want to be able to do this in a repeatable way. And so when we talk about continuous delivery, we're actually trying to get from artifact to production, so the hands of the customer. And the difference between continuous delivery and continuous deployment is that in continuous delivery, you control when it gets to the users. In continuous deployment, you do that code commit, it goes through the entire lifecycle, and it deploys right away. It gets released to the customers right away. In continuous delivery, you kind of decide. You can say, well, I don't want to trigger this yet, or I only want to release on Sundays, that kind of thing. And so it's like I said, we're really thinking about operationalizing the code so that it is ready to go out into production. And so you may decide that before you release it to a production environment, as part of your continuous delivery pipeline, you'll release it to a QA environment or a testing environment, or even a developer environment for people to interact with it, kind of test it out, manage that change, right? Fail that pipeline if it's not working, right? And then you can kind of decide, oh, I think this is ready, so let's get it to production. And we have a continuous delivery pipeline that does that. And so one of the biggest things, if you want to succeed with continuous delivery, is infrastructure as code. So like I mentioned, all of our software needs to run on hardware. And so one of the biggest things that you can do in order to make this process easier or better and faster is to introduce infrastructure as code. Define your infrastructure in terms of code. And that's this practice of infrastructure as code. So there's a couple of different things that you have to deal with when you're working with infrastructure, right? The first part is provisioning it. So standing it up, installing it, making sure it works, right? It's kind of the baseline. And then afterwards, you need to configure it, right? So maybe it needs a certain library, it needs a certain configuration setup, it needs another dependency before it can run this application. That's kind of what you have to deal with when you're working with infrastructure. And then this last bit is maintenance, right? Ensuring that if it needs a new version of something, that it has that. If it needs, if it's down for whatever reason, it's broken for whatever reason, that you can fix it. And so infrastructure as code tries to manage these three areas. And so if you're really trying to get to learn more about this area, or you're looking to start your DevOps career, really recommend that YAML, and then pick up HashiCorp Terraform, or if you know that you're targeting a particular organization that uses AWS, maybe check out CloudFormation. And then optionally, you can also go for any configuration automation, infrastructure automation tools like Ansible, Puppet, or Chef. And then likewise, if you're in a Kubernetes world, you're probably going to need to learn a little bit about package managers, Kubernetes package managers through Helm charts. So those are kind of the key areas that you want to focus on in terms of technology. Sweet. Do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. We kind of gotta start wrapping up. I have to get rid. It's my mother-in-law's birthday today, and it's really true. She doesn't have 7 birthdays a year, but let's know. Don't worry. We got a quick question here once again from Corey. What's your preferred IAC, Terraform versus CDK versus CloudFormation? Pulumi? What do you think?
Yeah, Terraform. It's probably the most popular one. It's also open source. So the thing that you'll see is just with these sort of DevOps tools, there's a heavy preference for open source. And so if you can leverage open source technologies, if you have a kind of understanding of one tool that's an open source, you can kind of relate it to a lot of the other vendor solutions that are provided.
Okay.
Yeah, very agnostic and flexible.
Yeah, I agree with Sergio. Yeah, thanks, Sergio.
This is literally my last slide.
No. So, don't worry. No, don't worry. No. I think the thing is this infrastructure as code thing. I think is super interesting, and we had a couple of developer advocates from HashiCorp on the meetup last year. And the thing is, from a developer experience perspective, or just like it's really well done, and so that's why there are so many fans of it. Anyway, keep going.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. So, just something to note. And then this last bit around here, I know we're over time.
No, we're good.
There are other practices, right, for the flow of value. You'll hear things about value stream mapping or value stream management, testing in production, chaos testing. I mentioned topologies, right? There's so many other practices that we couldn't cover today, but I think if you're just starting out, these are kind of the 5 key or 4 or 5 key practices that you should really focus in on and just know as a baseline, and it'll get you really far. So, oh, no, just kidding. I have another one. I'm sorry. Okay. This is the last one. I actually wanted to talk about DevSecOps because every person will want to kind of.
Yeah, no, because I actually had a couple of questions about that I'm going to forward you on Slack, but no, go for it.
Sweet. Yeah. So, the next thing about DevOps is just this idea of secrets and identity management. So securing your sensitive information. And some really great ones are HashiCorp Vault and Keycloak. Just get to know those. If you have some time, I recommend just knowing what KMS, key management service, and other encryption services do in that wheelhouse. But I just want to say, like, for things like the SolarWinds hack, a lot of the hacks that we see today, it's just because of exposed application secrets. Any secrets that you may have accidentally left out in plain text is the reason why someone can get access to your source code, put in malicious code, and then have that be shipped out throughout your CI/CD pipeline and into the hands of your customers, and it really sucks. And so one of the things that CI/CD helps with, and what this DevOps lifecycle helps with, is making sure that you actually secure these application secrets, because they live in so many parts of our software development lifecycle. They exist in our source code management, right? Sensitive secrets, access to certain environments, They live in our CI pipelines. They live in our orchestrators. They live in our runtimes. So just something to know. But with that, I spent a lot of time here today talking about the principles and the mindsets around DevOps, because I think it really matters what you think about DevOps, because that will inform how you work with your technologies. It'll inform how you work with other people on your team. And so one of the key takeaways here is to always just kind of ask someone else, what does DevOps mean to you? And that's the end of my presentation. I want to thank everybody for joining. I really appreciate the time.
Seriously, great questions. And that's what I just left a message in the chat. This conversation could obviously go on for more than one session. 2021, I think we're going to have enough time. I hope we have enough time to have Tiffany back on as a speaker, because these insights were great. Obviously, the comparisons and connections with photography gave us a really nice framework to be able to get in deeper. And the questions are perfect evidence of that. There's lots of curiosity about this. Follow Tiffany on Twitter. Follow Harness. We didn't get a chance to talk enough about Harness. That's why I actually have a couple of questions about Harness that I'm going to get in Slack. But I invite everybody, please jump in on our Slack, or you can ask Tiffany questions directly on Twitter. Very, very nice to have you, Tiffany. Normally, we have our graphic recorder, Angel, who is sick today, but we have something else that will be ready for you by tonight, if not tomorrow at the latest. So there will be a wonderful artistic representation of the things that were mentioned today from another artist who's on our team. So like I said, you've got all of Tiffany's contact info there. Please, you can obviously see she's a great resource. She's done other podcasts, very open person, willing to help. That's what we're all about here in the Data on Kubernetes community. Tiffany, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bart. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.